Guys, we got great news today. There are so many things that have been changing for M Plus lately, and I think that today is a massive day of news. I'm going to be linking down to all of these articles down in the description. Go check those out as well if you want to link them to your friends, or if you want to read them on your own time as well. But let's cover some of the most important news for 10.1 and 10.0.7 today. Let's check it out. But yeah, there's absolutely massive news this week for M Plus. Obviously, the biggest thing is going to be the Season 2 dungeon reveal. And so the biggest thing with the Season 2 dungeon reveal is Freehold is back, right? Let's take a look at this. So players have been speculating for months what the returning dungeons will be for Dragonflight Season 2, and the dungeons have finally been revealed. Neltharion's Lair, Freehold, Underrot, and Vortex Pinnacle are the Season 2 dungeons, and obviously those are going to be coinciding with Brackenhide Hollow, Halls of Infusion, Neltharis, and Uldamon. There was also a group interview, and some dungeon choice got explained. In the question, Michael from Esports, in terms of dungeons that are selected from season to season, did you try to tie those into what's happening with the Dragonflight story? It's definitely not coincidence. There are 4 dungeons that just remain Dragonflight dungeons that were not in season 1. So there's obviously Neltharis, Uldamon, Halls of Infusion, Brackenhide. That's 4 dungeons, and the other 4 are Underrot, Freehold, Neltharion's Lair, and Vortex Pinnacle. And in terms of how that pool is chosen, it's a smattering of ideas and philosophies there. Neltharion's Lair is, like you pointed out, definitely not a coincidence. Embers and Neltharion, yeah, I mean, it makes sense. Lore, right? Lore implications. They also have Drogbar. Vortex Pinnacle, I'm surprised that they picked this one. Vortex Pinnacle feels like it has some story implications and follow-up there. There are some fan favorites. And then they picked Freehold because of a fan favorite. Every time the community thread pops up about what dungeons you want to see in Season 2, Freehold is mentioned in every single one of those when they pop up. And then Underrot, interestingly, we look at Mythic Plus Dungeon Pool as a cohesive experience, and the way we look at a raid is a cohesive experience. So we have coverage in what types of damage profiles we're asking you to do and what type of utility we're asking you to use. And we feel like Underrot has a lot of core WoW gameplay mechanics with interesting dispel profiles. I feel like this is interesting reasoning for Underrot. In addition to that, there was a follow-up question about Brackenhide specifically. They're also aware of the current feedback in regards to Brackenhide and other Dragonflight dungeons. They're planning to make changes that include fully removing some things that are currently exist in M0s on top of that. Trust us, we've heard the feedback around of, hey, when Season 2 rolls around, if you've done Brackenhide on M0 the first week, it was pretty hard. So definitely taking a close look at individual dungeons and probably cutting some things that exist today in M0 and really asking, once affixes are in the mix, do you really need this pool to have 3 creatures that have a kick rotation or something like that? Very much we've been discussing that. All right, let's talk about the dungeons themselves. Dude, this is going to be sick. First off, Neltharion's Lair, maybe not my favorite Legion dungeon of all time. I think it is generally a pretty good Legion dungeon, though. I think that Blizzard has proven that the rotating dungeon model is one that is likely going to be successful just as a general rule. And I think that Neltharion's Lair, while it wasn't perfect, it definitely can get to a state where it's significantly better. There are some things like the Pelter mobs that I think probably could use a little bit of changing, but in addition to that, I think like the first boss could probably use a little bit of changing, and then like the dudes that ride on top of the scorpions, those are all fine. I think that like they need a little bit of changing, but I suspect that this is something that, like, all right, Blizzard's already proven that they're willing to put in effort and kind of edit how mobs function to make them a little bit more reasonable. We already saw this with Halls of Valor, and I think that NL is probably going to end up in a pretty decent state because of that. Freehold, obviously, one of the greatest dungeons of all time. I'm interested in a couple of things about Freehold specifically, because even though it was one of the best dungeons of all time, that was typically due to trash. Wasn't exactly always due to like the bosses, right? Specifically the first boss, Sky Captain Crag, he would one-shot people, and that was kind of weird. And I wonder if that's maybe going to be potentially looked at. I think that could be rebalanced to be a little bit more fair, to where you don't have to have a prot warrior spamming intervene, target of target intervene with safeguard up to not have people one shot. That's a pretty big deal. And then I think that I'm interested in seeing like what happens with the second boss. So how the trash rotated in that dungeon was one of the reasons that it was able to be kept fresh. But the downside of that too is like the bosses rotated, and specifically like Eudora on the second boss of Freehold was particularly annoying because she would like she would spam shot, and then just like the general dungeon balance of those bosses was not particularly close, to the point where, like, Eudora was the hardest one, but there was a week that just had Jolly and Raoul as the active bosses. So I'm interested in seeing if they change anything with the bosses in Freehold. I think in particular the first two bosses are the ones I'd probably be looking at, mostly just to remove one shots. I think that the rotating bosses is probably fine. It's more of an issue of just like getting one shot by the bosses. Underrot, I'm gonna be honest, I'm actually kind of surprised that they picked this one, but I don't think it's gonna be too bad. I am a bit concerned about a couple of things in Underrot, specifically the Kragmaw area. I think that without like, okay, so in BFA we had Outlaw Rogues, and this was like between the eyes stunning Outlaw Rogues, and that was a weird one for me, where it was, that spec was so good at being able to lock down all of those like spiders that were in the that were in that area, and on top of that they were able to stun maggots and stuff like that. And that's a situation where I'm not sure how that's going to fare in today's era of how much CC we have, because I mean Outlaw Rogue was able to do it by themselves, but now on average more classes have a little bit more CC, but I don't know if they have the CCs of BFA Outlaw Rogue. I think that that's something that's I'm interested in seeing like how that turns out. But overall, I think that Underrot's like a fairly good choice. It's very popular. I think that both Underrot and Freehold are fan favorites in regards to dungeons. I hope the last boss gets changed a little bit. If we go back and look at MDT, even there was more dungeons. BFA, Underrot. I mean, if you go and look at like the end of the Underrot, we have like Tentacle Alley. I would be interested to see if like these grotesque horrors could probably get changed a little bit, because these required, multiple melee kick rotation and then somebody would inevitably body pull them or something, and that was a bit tough. I kind of hope that gets changed. But overall, I think that the season's interesting. Never really played Vortex Pinnacle. I'm surprised they picked a Cataclysm dungeon. Some people have equated Vortex Pinnacle to Fires of Ascension 2, but I think that that's a bit too assuming, and I'm really interested in seeing like what Vortex Pinnacle is going to end up looking like. Yeah, I think that's overall I'm pretty hyped for season 2. I think that like the dungeon pool that they selected is quite a strong one, and I think that like moving off the first foot forward for season 1 into what we're seeing in season 2 dungeon pool wise is going to be super cool. They obviously have some work with Brackenhide Hollow and Halls of Infusion, kind of get these dungeons close to the point where they're M+ ready, because there have definitely been some shit that's gone down in those dungeons in M0. But I think that what Morgan said here at the bottom is like, oh yeah, we've heard the feedback surrounding season 2 dungeons, and I think that Blizzard has definitely proven themselves with how season 1 has performed, that they're willing to put in the time and effort to make the dungeons good, and it's not just something that they're doing half-assed, right? Where Blizzard realistically could have given players all 8 Dragonflight dungeons. They could have gone with the exact same model that they've gone with in the past, where like you just get all 8 Dragonflight dungeons and you get them for every single season, and that's all you get. And the only thing that's rotating is the seasonal affix. But Blizzard proving that they're willing to continue to like iterate on M+. You're getting new dungeons every single season. We're getting 8 new dungeons. On top of that, they state that they're willing to change them, and we've seen that they're willing to change them. And if things don't launch perfect, they're also willing to like hotfix update to the point where we're still seeing nerfs to dungeons even today. Like we got a nerf to Ruby Life Pools last night. Yeah, I'm excited. I think that season 2 is gonna be super sick, and I'm really, really excited for Freehold returning. That's obviously one of my all-time favorite dungeons as well. Wow, no seasonal affix. That, as the title reads here, no seasonal affix in Dragonflight Mythic Plus Season 2. Level 7 affixes are getting a refresh. God, I got some thoughts on this one. Seasonal affixes were added in BFA to change up gameplay from season to season, as the dungeons didn't change from season to season. From Infested to Thundering, seasonal affixes have been loved and hated, while adding varying levels of complexity. Thundering in particular has added quite a bit of complexity to dungeons, having to weave in clears between mechanics which force you to spread, with a severe level of punishment, essentially death, for failure. There's a question. Okay, Morgan, in terms of the philosophy of the affixes in particular for season 2, we've definitely taken a big step back, and we're looking at these holistically. One of the major changes we're making is we're actually not going to have a level 10. That is to say, the seasonal affix like Thundering. Whew. there won't be a replacement for Thundering, and Thundering is being retired. So at level 10, the scaling will continue to kick in, but there's no new affix there. Seasonal affixes were created as an idea that I want to say back in Battle for Azeroth, where we had the same dungeon pool where we'd add 1 or 2 dungeons here and there, but you wouldn't be playing the same dungeon for many seasons. And really we added those seasonal affixes as trying to solve the problem of it feeling like the dungeons were solved with a specific route and like giving a specific approach to the dungeon. This is very interesting. I'm gonna come back to this in just a second. Affixes have always been a popular community topic, especially recently with many players feeling frustrated at the state of some weekly M+ affixes such as Grievous and Quaking. With the difficulty of the complexity of these dungeons and Dragonflight going up, also having to deal with these affixes become more troublesome. Morgan stating, we're really going to take a closer look at the level 7 bucket and how much opportunity there is for counterplay, how much that's going to make your healer's life harder versus how much of an opportunity there is for counterplay. And, well, if I play really well, I can negate this affix and use my utility or whatever it may be. So we're definitely taking a look at the level 7 bucket as a whole, and really more along the lines of an affix refresh for that bucket, as well as no level 10 affix. So they're kind of saying like maybe like even a rework on this level 7. Okay, God, I feel like this is a really interesting one for me. So seasonal affix, no seasonal affix. My initial reaction is like, I actually kind of like these seasonal affix. I understand that not every player liked the seasonal affix, but I think that the seasonal affix provided a decent amount of value in regards to what it brought to the game, especially in the time that we have had seasonal affixes. Now, Thundering, I think, is definitely... I think it is warranted this. The community sentiment of, oh, it's too hard, it's too annoying, it's not very fun. There's a lot of different stuff with Thundering specifically that it's not great. But I think that one of the big things is like seasonal affixes were always kind of allowed to be imbalanced in a way because seasonal affixes are present from week to week, so the risk of them was always allowed to be super high. But in addition to that, the reward is also allowed to be super high, and I felt like that was more or less okay in a lot of situations. If you think about it like Prideful, that would never happen on a weekly affix. That mob was so polarizing for how the dungeons worked. If you think about Thundering, that's so polarizing for how the dungeons worked. Even if it got rotated into like a rotational affix, it would be changed before it would be added, just because of how it functions and like how punishing it is realistically if you mess it up. So I guess my initial reaction is like, I kind of like seasonal affixes. I thought that they brought a lot of value to M+, but I think ultimately I'm down to see Blizzard experiment with affixes. This is kind of something that I've been talking about for a little while, and I'm gonna. It's like I want to see some change in M+. I think that M+ is something that they haven't necessarily experimented a ton with recently. Now they have experimented with things such as, you know, the dungeon pool changing and whatnot, but I think in regards to affixes, they haven't been realistically changing as much lately. And I think that that's something that they absolutely can do. And I think that them being willing to be like, oh yeah, okay, let's try retiring a seasonal affix for a season. Let's try to do this level 7 bucket refresh and see how players feel about the game. And then, you know, if players miss the seasonal affix, it can come back. It's not something that necessarily has to be retired permanently. Like it can come back, I think, if players end up generally missing the seasonal affix. But I think that this is actually... my initial reaction is like, I kind of like the seasonal affix. I wish they would have maybe have had another one. But at the same point, I do understand how this is. And I think that it makes a lot of sense that Blizzard is looking to try stuff. And that's something that I'm most excited for, is Blizzard's just trying new stuff in regards to the seasonals. The level 7 bucket stuff, I'm really interested in, like, what do they mean whenever they say do a refresh? How this reads to me is like, they read it like it's a rework, but the way that it's worded also makes me think that they're just going to nerf all of them. So if we look at just the affixes in general, yeah. So if you look at the level 7, okay, so level 4 affixes are typically the on-death affixes. Level 7 affixes are the ones that are more, you know, gimmicky sometimes. So we have Quaking, Grievous, Volcanic, Storming, Explosive, and I think that this is a situation where, yeah, they can nerf them to be less impactful, but I don't know if that necessarily solves the problem, right? And so this is a really, really difficult situation for Blizzard to be able to tackle, and I think that this makes a decent amount of sense whenever they say they're taking a closer look at the level 7 bucket with opportunity for counterplay. I don't really expect them to fully add, you know, 5 new affixes to the level 7 row. I think that doesn't make any sense. I think that more likely than not, we're just going to see players or we're just saying Blizzard like nerf these down to be a lot more manageable at times. You know, like adding a DR on like how fast explosive can spawn, making quaking really coming into the patch with quaking in mind on designing a lot of bosses, right? Or having a lot more times where quaking will dissolve, like you see on Bone Maw, for example. Um, I don't know. It's just tough because volcanic is like a non-affix, and then it's just like you compare that to explosive, and you're like, these are not the same. Realistically, these are not the same affixes in regards to level of difficulty, and that's bad. But I don't think that like difficulty is normally the issue with the level 7 bucket. I think it's just like the added complexity of the dungeon. So I'm really interested to see what they do with affix refreshes, and I think that that's something that can be super super positive. It'd be cool. Yeah, overall, I think that Blizzard looking to change affixes was something that surprised me a lot. I think that especially with how fast they've been willing to just like fire at the hip for this change. No seasonal affix. Oh yeah, all right. We'll actually change the level 7 affixes. Let's try stuff. I think that that's super positive to me, and it kind of proves that Blizzard is continuing to, give M plus that love and care that it kind of deserves and it kind of needs to be successful in a lot of avenues. So I think it's cool. But yeah, I mean that's the big M plus announcement stuff that we've had today. Again, you can check these down in the description to get the links for that. There's also been a couple of other announcement posts. I'm also going to upload a reaction video to like a Dratnos dev interview that I thought was very insightful as well. I think that was like a super cool thing. But yeah, today's a great day to be a World of Warcraft fan. I would definitely go check out all the news. You can go look at all that stuff on Wowhead as well. And I will see you guys in the next video. Goodbye.